Let me start with what Larry was just talking about, because it's really what we do in the struggle right here that is of the utmost importance and is a real test. And just as what we're talking about on Syria, we can be a small force and a spark and a force of mobilizing others by the way we take up an issue. The same thing is true with October 24th, or the struggle against the banks in Detroit. How do you focus the attention of the movement here? The same thing we've been trying to do with People's Power assemblies, whether in Baltimore or any other city, or right here. So it's extremely important how we're working with others, because we're not a force alone. It's what's done in coalitions and to bring an idea alive. And I think we want to give a lot of attention to both Detroit and what's being attempted there, and really think through what we can do here for October 24th, because unless you're out in the streets, you don't. Sometimes the only way to really look at a piece of literature is if you're giving it to someone else, and then you're kind of seeing it through other eyes. And I also want to say a lot about this sign that we have hanging up here, Stop the Wars on Syria and Black Youth. Because making that link, that there's a war here that's every single day and is deeply felt, and whether it's stop and frisk, or whether it's the police shootings, or whether it's an attack on food stamps, there's no shame. There is no shame, and there is no limit to what they're willing to destroy and take back. I mean, food stamps, that is sustenance. That is like the ability to eat. And they cut $40 billion out of it over a period of, I mean, they'd spend that in a few days in a war. It's not that it's not there. So that really is a war here and the war there. And making that link, if we're not making that link, it's really not real. Now, I wanted to address a couple of things back on Syria, about how regional this war is. I'm sitting there in this Marriott hotel in Beirut, waiting for the conference to start. And because it was kind of early morning, I was just having coffee sitting in the lobby, right by the front doors. I was speaking to an Arab woman. Actually, it was the daughter of Frantz Fanon. But anyway, we're having coffee sitting there, and she pointed to the group who was sitting almost next to us, I mean right by the front door, but it was about 7 young men, very large. Any one of them looked like they would be a bouncer at a club, dressed kind of rough, and each of them with a big canvas satchel sitting next to them. And she said, see those guys right there? They're from Chechnya. They're all on their way in. You'll see it. Their ride is coming to, somebody will come by and pick them up. Just a little bit. It was true. It was true. So when I say that there's recruiting throughout the whole area, descending into Damascus, and how open the borders are, and how openly it takes place. I mean, this is the Marriott in Beirut. We should just be aware of what is flooding the area, and it endangers Lebanon also. It endangers not only Syria. Now, will they succeed? They put quite an effort into organizing a whole group in Jordan, the CIA, just last week, and someone was describing they didn't get past a few miles inside the border when they were dealt with. So this is a struggle. It's a military struggle. It's a political struggle. The level of U.S. arms is increasing, and the sophistication of them. It was described to us both heat-seeking weapons, also even weapons that are attached to motion detectors. So even that the U.S. is giving these forces. Now, just to answer some of the questions that were asked, in terms of the meeting with President Assad, there was one very interesting part. Now, Bashir Assad was really not trained for political life. He was a doctor, an eye doctor. And even some of the examples he gives are more medical in character. And so one of the things he said is, if you're dealing with cancer, you can't just cut, just spread. It takes a great deal of sophistication and care and precision. And everywhere that these bands are, if you just smash it, you attack a lot of civilians that are caught in the middle. Even civilians that may be aligned right now and confused with these forces. So it's constantly winning them over. And it's time after time also providing amnesties again and again and again. Anyone who, lays down their arms or says that they've switched sides or says that they're no longer fighting the government has been welcomed back. That's extremely, extremely important. It's the Syrian government that has time and again said that they're very much for a negotiated solution. The opposition to a negotiated solution has come from the so-called Free Syrian Army. Free Syrian Army is so chaotic they can't meet with each other, and they're fighting each other almost as much as they're fighting the government when they're not looting each other and each other's equipment. But the government has always been, and in his statements he made it clear, a negotiated solution is the only way. We should know that the Syrian Communist Party is part of the government now, and many forces. The other point he made was to describe, he said, Syria and the countries of the region are very much built on two pillars, he said, socially. Both Pan-Arabism and Islam. And it was what was so destabilizing was the pitting of the right-wing Islamic current against the rest of society. Now, I want to say something on that. How did that come about? Because this also came up in a real way in the discussion that the Grand Mufti of Syria had. And also when we met with these Christian forces, they stressed again and again how much Syria has historically been a mosaic of many different religious and ethnic groups and currents who've lived together and have a history of that. But there again, it's U.S. policy that really began in both a response to the Iranian Revolution and the using of forces in Afghanistan as a way to mobilize the warlord forces, and was very much reinforced. It's not just Saudi policy, this mobilizing of the Wahhabi, religious forces and Taliban. This is U.S. War College policy. This is the Pentagon that it's coming from. It's part of the sectarian violence of how to destroy the resistance in Iraq was to pit Sunni against Shia. Consciously. Put it on every ID card. Make it so you couldn't go from one block to the next. Every street corner divided. Parts of the country divided. The parliament by how many blocks, how many seats. Everything divided. And that impacts the whole region. You feel it in Pakistan today, in every country in the region. It's had its impact in Egypt. So we should just be aware that the level of sectarian violence and the consciously using one group against another, and particularly trying to mobilize the Sunni forces against, it was seen as seeing both Iran and also Hezbollah in Lebanon, how to try to pull Hamas in Gaza, Palestinian struggle away, and divide the resistance. And it goes on all the time, and there's an intense amount of disinformation and lies that are much more intense than all the lies and stories about gas. I mean, it goes on endlessly and at an intense level. So the forces who are standing up to this and saying, it can seem like a religious argument, about the importance of respect for different religions and the importance of respect for diversity and so on. And we'd say, well, we're not religious. Is that important? But it's extremely important when you hear the debate and discussion. It's groups refusing to be used one against the other, and also saying this isn't our tradition. I could go into that more, but I think that this is kind of the main points for here, and will be. I wanted to also. Leah asked a question about what we see for the future. What does it mean if Syria disarms? The only thing that's under discussion is the chemical weapons. And that depends on how far the U.S. wants to push. And you can see it's just an opening point for them. They say, well, it means chemical weapons. It also means the ability to deliver any kind of weaponry and all kinds of armaments. They'll put the kitchen sink into it if they're allowed. And it's exactly what happened in Iraq, where weapons of mass destruction meant that Iraq couldn't import pencils or X-ray machines because there's no form of technology that can't be used to also make a weapon. And a lot of that is also the fraud of the idea of weapons of gas are more deadly. When we were there, it was the anniversary of Sabra and Shatila, when I think it was 4,000, somebody can correct me on the number, of Palestinians who were killed by the Phalange, the fascist forces, as Israeli troops stood there. But they were overwhelmingly killed with knives and bayonets. But because they were disarmed and isolated, it could happen. So it's not just one form of weapon is more deadly than another. But in terms of Syria being disarmed of chemical weapons, as they state, they for a long time wanted to end the use of chemical weapons. They called for a weapons-free zone. And that was one point that Assad made and others have made, that their call throughout the whole region, just as others have, as Iran has called for making the region a nuclear-free zone. Who brings in the nuclear weapons? Who has the nuclear weapons in the region? It's the U.S. and Israel. And so countries of the region have said, let's disarm. Chemical weapons, nuclear weapons. Who maintains most of the weapons in the world today? The overwhelming majority comes from the U.S. And who holds it in the region? Overwhelmingly, the U.S. So, at any rate, I don't think what's at all on the agenda is them disarming their own defense and conventional weapons, and they have been doing pretty well in terms of organizing to push back the resistance. It's not resistance, these mercenary bands, these rebel bands. The government has been doing pretty well at that. I think they'll be able to continue, even though we need to be aware that more sophisticated weapons are coming in. But the danger of a U.S. bombing was what happens when that goes on, as we saw in Libya, as we saw in Iraq, as we saw in Yugoslavia. Remember, in Yugoslavia, they destroyed 438 schools and 14 tanks. It's easy to hide a tank. For heaven's sakes, any haystack will do. But the schools, what had been constructed was to target. That's what was destroyed in Libya. The communications, the electric grid, the Grand Waterway, which was a wonder in Libya. That's what was destroyed. That's what was intended to be destroyed. So the fact that the U.S. was stopping that 90 days of bombing, that they were just, you could feel them thirsting to carry it out, that is important. And it was a collective world movement that did it, and it's why we want to stay on the alert to stop that, because I really do think they can take care of business against all of these groups. The U.S. was so anxious to bomb because all these diverse groups were losing. They haven't been able to really hold any ground, unless they can hold ground where they're surrounded by civilians and the government is worried about killing a lot of civilians in order to root them out. So I think those answered most of the questions, and in the days ahead we'll have to figure out how to really answer more of these, and I think both stay tuned, know that there's great determination there, and determination will continue here. Thank you.